Starting next class, we'll go through the chapters 6 and 7. Chapter 6 is the internal control chapter, and it's kind of in two different parts, or well, actually, you can kind of there's the third part too. But anyway, and then chapter 7 is for publicly traded companies. They have to have an audit on the financial statements and on the internal controls, management's assessment of internal controls. So they have to have two audits. One is on financial statement, one's on internal controls. So the chapter 7 is on that internal controls for financial statements. It's for that the audit report on it. So it's a separate audit report. It's very similar, and then the testing and everything else is very similar to regular auditing for an internal control stuff. There's a couple quirks to it, not too many, but yeah. For example, they only have two reports. It's either clean or it's blank. The power going out through me. Anyway, there's a few quirks. It's not that it's really not that different, and the requirements of reporting and that sort of thing to upper management and all that is pretty much identical. And it's required for publicly traded companies. If you're not a publicly traded company, it's not required. But if it is, then you do a report. But there is also another audit report on internal controls by the AICPA that is different. It's for a company that is not publicly traded but still wants a report on their internal controls. So there's actually a second internal control report that you run into. They tested. I think they tested some on the CPA exam. I think because I remember seeing the questions for it. Not too many. I can't imagine it happens all that often. But anyway, okay. So let's pull up the. There we go. Okay, monetary unit sampling. So monetary unit sampling is specific for auditing. It's not used for anything else. Our classical sampling, you could use that for anything. You could use that to determine how far someone can, hit a baseball or whatever it is. You could use those same techniques for almost anything. Monetary unit sampling, I should probably give you, it's also known as a couple other terms. Probably proportional to size. It's also known as there's a random bunch of letters. No, it's also known as dollar unit sampling. Actually, I think I've seen it more called this than anything else. But again, it's, these are all the same thing. They're all the same thing. And it's unique in that it's specific for auditors. It's not for, it's not for, seeing how far someone can hit a baseball or something. All right, so let's see. I gotta switch videos. I want to kind of give you the idea of it. focus dog. Okay. So here's kind of the idea behind dollar unit sampling. And I'll use our example here as kind of 5,000. Okay. It's sort of like this. And this page, I think we have accounts receivable. And the value is 5,000, I think. Here's the idea behind monetary unit sampling. It says, okay, we can break up oops, I just smeared it. We can break up this $5,000 into, say, $1,000 chunks. So it's sort of like each one of these is a little sample area. You'll sample out of this area, and that you'll have pick one item to represent that entire, what they call interval. These are called intervals. So one item will represent this interval. One item will represent this interval, and so on and so forth. So these are all intervals. And you basically do, it's basically a ratio estimation for each of these intervals. So you're going to take one interval, pick one item and say, okay, this one item represents the entire interval. And you can do that for each one of these, one interval, one interval. And you use ratio estimation to determine what is the projected value, but more importantly, probably the projected misstatement is probably the one they more commonly would go to. So this is kind of the idea behind it. And there's actually some very interesting where am I at, man? Okay, sorry about that. Kind of flying around here. Okay, so monetary unit sampling. So we have these. So this is the accounts receivable. Hey, I spelled it right. And we have these items in the accounts receivable. And kind of like I did in the data just now, we're going to take 5 items we selected. And so the sampling interval is 5,000 divided by 5 items equals 1,000. So this is going to be our sampling interval. Okay, so this is our sampling interval. So we're going to take every 1,000th item. Now here's how we do it. We go to the cumulative book value here, and you'll notice this cumulative book value is sort of like this. You know, it just keeps adding them up. So the first one's going to be the same. Second one's going to have both of them in, and you get the idea. You know, it just keeps adding up. So 500 plus 200 is 700, 700 plus 600 is 1300. You get the idea. So what we're going to do is see which item will cross the interval. So the first one, which one will cross the 1000 interval?
$600.
Yep. So this one crossed the interval. I think it was underlined.
Did you consider it in the first or in the second? Like, is it on the front end or the?
In this case, it would be on the back end of it, but you could have a random start. You know, that you could start anywhere and then do every 1000.
You're saying it's in interval 1, basically.
Yes. Yeah, so this will be item 1. Then you want the one that crosses the $2,000 one, which would be which one crosses the 2,000? Oh, come on, you guys are toying with me.
800.
Yep. I'm gonna change that. I'm gonna change it to okay, so 800. So this crosses the $2,000 one. 7 crosses the 3,000. 9 crosses the 4,000, and the last one is that. Now you could definitely have and you'll often have a random start. The random start will be somewhere between 1 and 1,000. You know, in your interval, whatever your interval is, somewhere in between 0 and that interval, and then go on from there. I'm just doing it this way just for, you know, kind of ease in explaining why we do it that way. Okay, so these are here's the sample. Will be item 3, 6, 7, 9, and 10. So these are going to be the ones that are in our sample. Okay. So for item 1, nope, stop that. Item 3. We'll take our audit amount over our book amount. How come I didn't do the? Should have done it a little differently. Okay, so this is so let's take a look. So here is the audit amount. I'll make that a different color. And here is the book amount. Okay, so this one there's no problem. Audit value is 600, book value is 600. So coming down here, let's not do it in red. Times the interval. don't know what I was thinking when I did these. So the interval was 5,000. No, it wasn't 1,000. Oops. Well, our projected value. Well, okay, 600 over 600 is just 1 times 1,000. So the projected value would be 1,000. Projected misstatement would be 0. Again, we're using one item for the entire interval. And if that item checks out okay, we say, okay, the entire interval is okay. Get rid of all this. Okay. Well, let's go to the next one. I'm just going to copy this. I don't have to do all the. Okay, the next one is number 6. And for number 6, we have the book value is 800. The audit value is 560. So audit value over A or B, audit over book, 560. And that was 800. So here's the audit. This is what the auditors find. We find that there were 560 and the book value is 800. Okay, so we multiply that out. Time for Mr. Calculator. Mr. Calculator was playing or something here. Okay, so this is 560 divided by 800 times 1,000. Okay, so for this one, the projected value would be $700. And what we're saying is that in that projected misstatement, this is what we're saying the value of that interval is. So the misstatement would be how much? Of the $1,000 interval, they say the real value is 700. So what would be the projected misstatement? Anyone?
300.
Yep. Yeah, so this is a projected misstatement, and
Do we need to represent it as a negative, or does it matter which way the sign is?
you're actually not gonna. It's not gonna matter, and I'll tell you why if we get to the end of this thing.
Okay.
But yeah, yeah, you don't need to. Do it. I'll tell you why. Okay, let's go to the audit amount was 450. The book amount was 450, so this is 450 over 450. Okay. So again, we pick one item. If that item is okay, then the entire interval is okay. Use this one. Okay, 7.9. Audit amount is 750. No, it's not. Book amount is 750. Audit amount is 300. Whatever that is. 400. Okay, so the projected value is 400. Projected misstatement is 600. Oops. No, that's right. And 10 is 900 and 900. And everything's okay with that one. Okay. So our projected value, you could add all these up. Usually what they do is they will just take the projected misstatement, and that's what they will subtract from the total of 5,000. But we can do it either way. I'll show you. So let's be the totals. Go back. Okay, so the totals. The book value total is 5,000. All the intervals together should equal that. If you add all those up, it comes up to 1,100. I think it's 4,100. Yeah, it's gonna be 4,100. Okay, 109. Okay. So projected misstatement is 900. And you could, so here's the projected value, the 4,100. Now, to get that number, you could just take the 900 and subtract it from this. And the reason I say that is we only have 5 here, but suppose you had 300. You'd really only be looking, it'd be a lot easier to add up whatever ones with the misstatement rather than the entire column of, however many of these you have. So a lot of times they'll focus on this number more than anything else. So our projected value will be 4,100.
I'm kind of confused.
Mm-hmm.
It's because it says total projected misstatement, not because I thought it was the 900 for item C.
No, you're right. You're right.
Okay.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Thank you. Yeah, the projected misstatement is 900. I put the projected book value on there. Thank you. Yeah, I was looking at this and I was thinking, man, why didn't I put the projected? And it is. This is projected misstatement because this is one they usually talk about, and we will use that later on. We come up with an upper limit on the misstatements. We'll get to later.
So the other method is you would take the interval minus the projected misstatement, gets you the projected.
Yeah, you notice that these are the same. You know, you take 900 from the 5,000. This is going to be the projected value.
Okay.
Now, a couple of rules about this. Let's put pros and cons about. Okay, the pros of this method. First of all, a lot of times, if there's not too many errors, if there are a few misstatements, the sample size is usually smaller than classical sampling for the same amount of confidence you'll have in it. So the sample size is usually smaller given the same, say 95% level. And if there's a few misstatements, you don't expect many misstatements or any misstatements, usually the sample size is smaller. And that can be huge because sampling is the one thing that really adds a lot of cost to an audit. So if you can get just as comfortable, pulling up half the number of items, that's a huge savings in both your money and the savings for the client. So that's the pros to it. Another thing you'll notice about this is if we go up here, here's the book values. You'll notice that a lot of times the ones that cross, whatever the interval is, the ones that cross the interval are more likely to be the larger ones, right? It's more likely to be larger ones. It's not saying the little ones can't be found. So if you had one with a book value of $10, it's possible that one gets picked. It's absolutely in the probabilities that it could get picked. But it's less likely to get picked than one that is for $800. So one that's $800 will be 80 times more likely to get picked than one that's $10, say. So the bigger they are, the more likely to get picked. Let's probably number these. Oops. Having a rough day. I can't number anymore. How many number ones do we have? Okay. So larger to be picked. It automatically stratifies it. Yeah, you remember we talked about stratification where you want to pick the larger ones. So we said, okay, anything that's say over $10,000, we take 100% of those. No, not 1,000% of them. And whatever, 1,000 to 9,000. 999, we take 40% of those, and remember we did that before in another handout where you stratify the sample, the larger ones are the more likely ones you want to see. You don't have to worry about that for this. Oh, what am I doing? Using this method, you don't have to worry about that. It automatically stratifies them. Not only does it stratify them, it does it proportionally to the size. You know, something for $100 has 100 times more likely is 100 times more likely to be picked than one for $1. So it automatically, you know, precise. Another thing is, it picks the sample for you. You're not pulling out a random number table, looking for a random, you know, randomly pick it. It will pick out the ones that you want. Whatever ones cross the interval, those are the ones that get picked. And this one, this last one is maybe the most important and why we like this one. Okay, everything on here has a chance to be picked based on the size of it, right? Now, suppose number 2 wasn't 200. Suppose it was 1200. Let me get rid of these. So suppose number 2 was 1200. How likely would it be that number 2 gets picked? So item number 2, let's say that the management's doing a fraud. They added $1,000 to number 2. Is that, you know, oh, we need more, we need to make it look better than that. So they add $1,000 to number 2. How likely is that item going to get picked?
Okay, 100%.
100%. So the more, you know, because this would go up to 1,000. If it's more than the interval, if the item goes up to be more than the interval, so the more that the more that they would try to inflate these numbers. I'm going to put them back to where they were. Oh, wait, what am I doing here, man? The more they try to inflate these numbers, the more likely it is you're going to catch it. And at some point, if they make the numbers big enough, if they make it larger than the interval, it's 100% is going to catch it. So the more that they cook the books, the more that they change the numbers. And by the way, because it's proportional to the size, you know, say, well, what if they don't do it all on this one? What if they add, you know, 200 here, 200 here, 200 here? All of those make it more likely that they'll be caught. If you add $200 to any of these, it moves them up. It says, okay, it's more likely that they'll be caught because they have a larger number. It's more likely they're going to be the ones that cross the interval. So even if they try to be, you know, sneaky and spread it out over a few accounts, it's still more likely they'll be caught. So, you know, that makes it really unique, and it also makes it, you know, a very good one for someone for finding material misstatements. Any question on that? Now, more room here. I'm gonna erase all this stuff. We don't need this right now. Okay. Now you're probably wondering, what are the cons? This is so great. How could there be anything wrong? There actually is. There actually is a instructor who doesn't know how to use a computer. Okay, so this is cons. The biggest con is that this is not to be used for understatements. It's only for overstatements. And here's why. If they change something to, if they decrease the value, it's less likely to be picked, right? If they change this to, instead of 600, they put it as 60, it'd be much less likely to cross that interval. And if they change this to 0, it'll have no chance of crossing the interval, right? It won't be any, this will be a 700. So if they understate something, and especially if they write it down to 0, you'll never catch it. It'll never come up. So it's only good for things that are, that are overstatements. It does not work for understatements. So things that they're going to overstate, accounts receivable, for example, that would be one that is a good one to use this method for, because it's more likely that a company will use it to overstate. It's possible they could understate it to try to reduce their taxes or something, but more likely, more commonly, you'll see them trying to increase it. Things it's bad for, things like accounts payable. Accounts payable, they're going to try to hide those from you, and using this method, they just put a 0 in and you'll never find it. So it's only good for overstatements, and it's not good for understatements. And by the way, if you're testing and you're not sure whether they would be overstating it or understating it, this is not a good method to use. You should use the classical sampling. If there's a problem, expanding the sample size is difficult. Oops. Right. All right. You'll notice something here. If you expand the sample size, you say, okay, 5 items, we came up with a problem. So, what do we know about sampling? Well, if you come up with a problem, at your 95% level, there's a 5% problem, okay, we'll change this to, I don't know, 8. What's the problem with just changing this to 8? What's the problem with just saying, okay, we'll make the sample size 8? What also changes? Interval.
Interval getting smaller.
Yeah, so if you change this to 8 items, it'll be 5,000 divided by 8, the interval, I think, is 625 or something like that. But anyway, so it's very difficult to actually expand the sample. And a lot of times what you'll do in this situation, if you do run into a problem with this, is you could switch over to classical sampling. But yeah, it can be a problem. If there is a problem, it's hard to expand the sample size. So there are some cons to it. There are some hooks to it. And again, this is probably the biggest one, though, that it's, oops. It's only 4, or not to be used for understatements. Well, it's only for overstatements. And the more they overstate something, more likely it'll be caught. So it's really good for overstatements. It's really bad for understatements. There's also something unique about this one that is kind of not apparent, but it's in there. Let me see. And that is, each dollar has the same, each dollar is actually the sampling unit. And each dollar has the same likelihood of being picked. Now those dollars will be in different items, and items with the more dollars are more likely to be picked, but each of those dollars has the same chance of being picked. So in our case, 1 out of 1,000. Any dollar in that whole cumulative thing has the same chance of being picked, and it's 1 out of 5,000. Or no, well, 5, but 1 out of 1,000, I guess, the interval. So 1 out of 1,000 chance of being picked. Any dollar. So every dollar is actually a sample item. That's why they call it dollar value, monetary unit, dollar. I think they use monetary unit, I think, because it might not be in dollars, it might be in pounds or euros or whatever it's in. But so each of those has a chance of being picked. So it's actually a sample of dollars. And that's actually very interesting. Because if you have a column of ones that's 5,000 long, what's the standard deviation? If everything is $1, what's the standard deviation? That's right, nothing. It's 0. Right? If they're all $1, if you take the dollar amount, then the standard deviation would be all over the place. But if everything is $1, and every item in the sample is 1, and it's $1, and there is no standard deviation. Kind of a strange concept, but that's part of the beauty of it is that it's like that. And the nice thing about that is when we pick the sample size, we don't need to find the standard deviation. Classical sampling, you do. Probably proportional size, you don't need to find the standard deviation. And there wouldn't be one if you did. So let's see here. Let's go back to this, and let's go back to, okay. So that is kind of the idea behind it. And now we are going to kind of do the nuts and bolts of this thing. Now, to do these, we need to go to the last page of the handout. Oh, hey, did I get everything here? I can't remember. Oh, this is okay. Well, let's. Okay, so the very last page of the handout, page 7. I think I'm going to copy this if I can. I'm going to copy this into another document. You guys don't need to copy it in another document if you don't want to. I'm copying it into another document because I'm going to have both of them up at the same time. I should make this into a, I thought maybe I did before. Make it into a regular text. Okay. Okay, so let's take a look at this here. Reliability factors for misstatements and overstatements. So there's actually going to be 2 tables that we are going to use. There's this one, the reliability factor one. This is the one that's used the most. This is the one that you're going to learn to hate. No, I'm kidding. But so this is the one that we use for most of the stuff. Expansion factors, we only use this to get the sample size. And here, why didn't I write that out? Here's the sample size computation. Okay, I'm going to copy that. right in there. I should have done that in the first place. Okay, so our sample size we take the total population times reliability factor and divide by all that stuff. Okay, so let's do this step by step. Okay, the total population, we're talking about the book value here. Yeah, 1.6 million. Times reliability factor. Now, the reliability factor is based on this. I'm gonna get these both on the same page. I bet I can. No. Oh. Darn it. Oh, I could collapse this, right? Somehow. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, so up here we got, so reliability factor. So let's go down here. So we see 5% here. All right, and they say row 0 is used for the reliability factor for sample size, which we're doing, and for basic precision, which we haven't done yet. So row 0, I can't expand it because I'm in a, oh, there we go. Yeah, close enough. So line 0, 5%. We're going to use 3 as our reliability factor. See where I got that? Again, it says right here, row 0 for the, okay. We're going to divide that by, go down here. The tolerable misstatement, so whatever the account is here, I'll go down one more. The tolerable misstatement is 120. Minus the expected misstatement. And this is maybe the statement you got last year. You know, how you come up with that. Times an expansion factor. Now the expansion factor, we go back down to this here, is the table underneath. Nice thing about the expansion factor there's only one of them. So the expansion factor is 1.6. So we're at 5,000 times 1.6. And so that will be our sample size. So sample size equals, oh yeah, I can go over here. It'll be easier. Uh, 1.6 million 3 is what, 4.8 million? Yep.
42.86.
Yeah, that's just for the whole thing. I don't know.
The top's 4.8 million and the bottom's 112,000.
Okay. So 4.
How do we like to round this type of thing? Because it needs to be a whole number, right?
No, actually, I would encourage you to round it up, but the actual is to round it off to the nearest. Yeah, you're right. Round off to the nearest one. Okay, so 120,000 minus what's that? 8,000. Yeah, you're right. 112.
Well, it's 112,000. How many digits do you want to go on?
So let's see. Comes out to what did you say?
42.857.
Okay, so we would round this one up. The real method says you round it to the nearest whole number. I would say always round it up. Even if it came out to 42.1, I would round it up. Why? If you go into court or something, you never want to have to explain that you rounded it down or for some reason. And taking one more item is a good idea usually. if it's gonna cause somebody concern. So this would be the sample size would be 42. So we would say round that up to
43.
Oh, you know what? I realize what's going on with mine. Probably going on with yours too. It changed to relative. I hate that. I'm having lots of word problems today. So anyway, so that is the sample size. So we will take 43 items. The interval, do I have that on here? I can't remember that. Oh yeah, interval. Total book value divided by the sample size. So we're gonna take 43 items, so we're gonna take 1.6 million. Uh, 1.6 million. Divided by 43 items. Oops. Equals some number. $37,209. Oops. So this will be the interval. So the first one that crosses 37,209, we pick. Next one that crosses what, 74, 418.60 or something, whatever it comes out to. That'd be the next one, and so on and so forth. Now, even if this is kind of a little bit of a pain, well, first of all, it's the first one we did, so we do something once. But this is going to be way faster to find, sample size than the classical sampling. Also, it's true about this method. You have to worry about picking the sample. If you had picked 43 items for classical sampling, now you got to go to random number table or generator or something to find. You don't do that with this method. Whichever one crosses the interval, you do cumulative total. Whichever one crosses that interval is picked. So in that, it's kind of cumbersome now because we're not used to using it, but it actually has it's much quicker, much easier to use than classical sampling for a lot of stuff. Okay, well, let's do one more. Now be careful on this next one because the the risk of acceptance is changing there. It's 10 instead of 5. I know what I'll do. You guys are working on that. I'll put this up on the screen. Yeah. There we go. So see if you can figure it out. I'll put the answer up here in a second.
Do you want the answer?
Yeah.
So I think the sample size is 114 items.
Yep.
Which was 5,775 million over 51,000. Became 113.24 rounded up.
The
That's your sample size, right?
the population, the book value will be 2,500,000.
I was saying the sample size before being rounded was 113.24. We rounded it up to 114.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the sample interval is 2.5 million divided by 114.
Yeah, 2.5 million. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
right.
Equals 21,929.82. And just for anyone that's checking their math, the sample size was 2.5 million times 2.31 over 60,000 minus, and then parentheses 6,000 times 1.5, which was 5.775 million divided by 51,000.
Yeah, so this is, I got 20.
Is it 37? Huh, hold on. 2.5 million divided by 114, 21,929. Yeah, .82.
21.99. Yeah. If you did 113, it'd be a little bit different. It'd be a little bit larger.
I just use the will always round up note you
Yeah.
told us.
Yeah, and this, like I say, the real method will say round off to the nearest one. But you got to remember what you're
More
doing.
conservative, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Even if you did that, you'd still get 22,123. So somewhere your 37 number just came out of the blue. All right.
What's going on? Yeah, everything's good. So wait. Yeah, it's gonna be pretty close. I mean, it's not gonna be that much of a difference. Ooh, wait a minute. Left off 20,000 off it. Yeah, so this will be so that'll be pretty close. But like I say, I would probably go with 114 just to, you don't want to go into court and say you rounded down. And remember, the work papers are basically set up so that if you do get drug into court, you can say, hey, no, we did our job. Look what we did. Yeah. So this is picking the sample size. And although it's kind of cumbersome now because this is the first time we've gone through it, this is so much faster than classical sampling. And just getting the sample size. And not only that, once you're done with it, you have to worry about picking the sample. It's going to pick it for you anyway, which one you pick here, every 21,920, that's the one you're going to take. You just put an Excel sheet, whatever one crosses, just keep adding them all up. Whichever one crosses those intervals, that's one you pick. Big ones are more like, if they have if they're cooking the books on something, if it goes above, say, 22,000, it's 100% going to get picked. So the more they cook the books, the more likely it's going to get caught. They cook it for $1, you get one and whatever that. But if they go more than 22,000, it'll be caught. Any questions on that? Okay, let's take a break before we go to this next one, because up until this point I've shown it as a nice clean thing, but actually it's a little bit more clunky when we start working with it. So let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll come back and work on page. Okay, page number 4, problem 4. Okay, I'll put this one back if you guys want to look at it. So let's say, so be back at 7:13. Let me go 7:20. Sorry about that. I was talking to myself. I muted. The monetary unit sampling, there's a few rules that we come to doing these projected amounts down here. The incremental allowance amount is an additional amount of error that could be, let me just talk. The incremental allowance amount is an amount of additional error that could be present in the sample, and it's based on two different things. It's based on how many errors you find. The more errors you find, the more incremental you're going to have, and the size of the error. A $100 error may not be that big a deal, whereas a $10,000 error might be a bigger deal. So the incremental will treat the larger dollar amounts. It'll say, okay, well, if this can be off by 10,000, it's possible that not only this one, but other ones can be off by a lot too. So it's incremental in that, in the interval. So as long as the the book value is less than the interval. So think back to the first page. I don't think anything was more than 900. Those are all less than the interval. So you could have an incremental for that. If the book value of the item is greater than the interval, what that tells you is that in that interval, nothing could be more wrong in that interval. It covers the entire interval. So if you get a book value that's higher than the interval, you won't have an incremental allowance. And we're also going to have to make an adjustment for the misstatement, because the misstatement will be based on the larger book value rather than the incremental value, which is smaller. So a couple of quirks for that. Another thing, I think I told you guys this method isn't used for understatements. If you run into an understatement, you ignore it. It's not supposed to catch them. So, if you do find one, so you audit something, you come up with $500 and the book value is $400, you're not supposed to find those. It treats that as if there's no problem. It just ignores it. So a little bit of a quirk there. Let me see here. I know what it is, except I'm constantly looking around. I'm going to have it so that the controls on on my screen, they go away whenever I don't move my mouse around, so I can never find where I'm at. All right. Now let's switch cameras. See, I've been doing this for a year, and I'm learning. It takes a long time to learn, but okay. So this is kind of what this is talking about. I don't know why I numbered them that way, but so it's possible if the book value is smaller than the interval, then it's possible that there could be additional things wrong. I explained them in a different order than I have on here. If the book value is larger than the interval, it means that nothing more could go wrong in that interval. It covers the entire interval. So there won't be any incremental. And here, understatements are ignored. Okay. So let's see how this thing all works out. Okay, first one here. These are kind of just set up that you could actually just kind of do this. 14,000 divided by 20,000. Oops. Let's see. Times 40,000 gives you a projected value of some number. So 14,000 divided by 20,000. So the projected value is 28,000. Hey, it's a smaller 28. What happened here? Maybe it's not. Okay. And the projected misstatement would be 12,000. Included in the incremental allowance, yes. Notice that the book value is less than the interval. So this misstatement will show up in the incremental allowance because there could be more things wrong in that interval. We picked up, the book value, there's 20,000, so it was only half of the stuff in that interval was in this item. So it's possible things could be more wrong in there. Okay, coming down here.
Are we supposed to know what this incremental allowance amount is, or are we just saying it's a yes or a no?
Right now, we're just saying a yes or a no. It's incremental allowance is a pain. We're going to learn how to do it, but right now it'll just be a yes or no. Yeah. When I do show you, you'll wish I hadn't. I'll put it that way. I'm kidding, but the it actually is something that could be done a lot easier than the way the books show it. When we get to it, I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so this is equals. So, oops, 2,400 divided by 3,000. 32,000. 8,000. This one I put in well, for a couple of reasons. In some of the literature, they'll tell you if the account shows 0, you should look into why it's 0, which to me is kind of funny because you're going to do that anyways, not just for this method, but to see if there's a problem with it. But if it is truly a 0 and the book value is 1,700, and the 0 misstated by 40,000. Included in the incremental, yes. Because 1,700 is less than 40,000. This one. This is an understatement. you'll notice that the audit value is 2,600, they only have 1,900. This method is not supposed to catch those. And in this case, we ignore it. Projected value, that interval will be 40,000. Oops. Projected misstatement, 0. Included, no, there's nothing wrong with it. You would include it in the incremental value, it's perfect. So if it's an understatement, projected misstatement is going to be 0. Okay, now for the really wacky ones. You'll notice the book value is more than the interval. So it was 100% sure that this one would have been caught. The audit value was 11,000. For whatever reason, this is at 44,000. It was 100% sure that this would be caught. Now I'm going to do it incorrectly. I want to show you why this is incorrectly. Don't do what I'm doing. I'm doing it wrong. One of the few times I'll be doing it wrong on purpose. If you were to multiply this out like we regularly do, okay, say, okay, this is, if we were to multiply this out, the projected value would be 10,000. Oops. So don't write this up. This is wrong. And the misstatement would be 30,000, right? So if we were to say, okay, this is, we'll just multiply it out like usual, right? There's a problem here. We're projecting a misstatement of 30,000. How much is this thing actually off by? Just look at the item 5. How much is item 5 actually off by? Forget about all this other stuff. Hey, I can let them go. What is item 5? What's the misstatement in that, just that item? What is it? The evidence books are 44,000. We do the audit, we find it's only worth 11,000. How much is that one item misstated by?
33,000.
Yep. Notice that the actual is 44,000. So whenever you get the book value is more than the interval, you don't do the ratio. You simply say what they are up by, is it? And this is the amount that will be in this statement. And if you need to put the projected misstatement in, you probably wouldn't need to do that. Usually just go by the, but it would be 7,000. Okay. So whenever you run into this situation,
Do you have those flipped? Just so I understand, the 33,000 is the projected value, and the projected misstatement's the 7, or is it the other way around?
the projected misstatement will be the 33,000. That's what it's actually misstated by.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and then, and again, this goes about because of this down here being greater than. And you'll notice too, if we were to multiply it out, it kind of have the opposite impact that you normally do for sampling. It would be reducing. The projected would be a reduction of the misstatement rather than projecting it over a larger sample. So if it is bigger than the interval, you simply take the actual misstatement. It's going to be higher. And you're doing it because it actually is misstated by 33,000. That's an actual misstatement. It's not a projected misstatement. These misstatements are projected. This one's only off by 600, but we're projecting it over the entire interval, so that's why it comes out a projected misstatement of 8,000. Whereas down here, it's a larger amount. We know that it's misstated by 33,000, not 30,000. Now, is it an incremental allowance? No. It couldn't get any worse. That interval is completely taken out. So that had to cross at least one interval. It may have crossed 2 intervals. And the same thing is true down here. The 90,000 would certainly cross 2 intervals. May have crossed 3. So again, you just put the actual misstatement down, whatever it is. 90,000. 65. At 25? Getting near 8 o'clock. You may want to check my. I think it's 25. Okay, so this would be projected value would be what, 15,000. And again, this would be, no, it doesn't go in the incremental allowance. It could not get any worse. It already covers 2 intervals, maybe even 3. Okay, so let's take a look at how we would work this out. Oh, here's the book value. Let's see, have a dollar sign in front of it. Book value of accounts receivable is 800,000. These were the items that were found that were. So we probably add up the projected misstatement, whatever this comes out to. Better use a calculator. A little muddle-headed right now. $118,000. And that's just adding all these up. Right there. So that would be our projected misstatement is 118,000. When we talk about the upper limit, these incremental allowances, which we haven't talked about yet, those will increase it a little bit. We'll talk about that. I won't get to tonight. We'll get to the next class. Right? And so the accounts receivable, the balance would be, what is it, 800,000. Copy of this. Oh, I'm sorry.
$682.
Yeah. And again, we don't have to worry about whether that's an understatement or overstatement. It's always going to be an overstatement. This method isn't used for overstatements.
So it's like almost 15% off. That's pretty substantial.
Yeah. Now you got to remember too. I make these a little bit more exciting because if you, in real life, I've been, one of the things about the private proportion of size.
I mean, that's like saying that revenues are off by 15%. That potentially could be a problem.
Yeah, but I mean, if you wonder why people get lazy on audits and stuff sometimes, is because you're going through 200 items. By the time you get through like 60 and you haven't found, they usually go one or two ways. It's either, you go through 60 of them and they're all a complete mess, and or you go through 60 and you don't find anything, and you still got 140 more to go. So if I were to put that on in a handout, this stuff isn't, it doesn't exactly jump at you anyways. But yeah, so if in real life, if you ran into this, you would, probably be pretty disappointed in it. And that's another thing something I do when I do this one, I get people will talk about and say, well, you only had 5 items, and out of 5 items, 2 of them are off, 40% of them are off. But like, well, I make them exciting. It's just, okay. Ooh, this one's gonna take about an hour. I think we'll wait. We'll stop there. We will get through this though. So next class we'll start in on page. We probably will start the chapter 6 and 7 handout. Get through part of it anyways, and we should be able to finish this up. I think there's only 2 problems left, right? Yeah. Okay. These problems take a while though, so we'll. But anyway, this will be the last. This will be the last type of thing that we do for the. And then we'll get the sampling exam. By the way, I think I know that I put the wrong week for spring break in. I think I put this week in the spring break. So if you left for Florida, that's my fault. But I think I don't think it's like for 3 or 4 weeks. But anyway, so when we finish this handout, we will have everything we need for the statistics exam, and it will cover classical sampling. It will cover this, obviously, monetary unit sampling. And it will cover some of the attribute sampling that we had for the sampling overview handout. And once those are all in there. And by the way, it used to be kind of noted that the probably proportional size was the better sampling because it's made specifically for auditing. But the ACCT433 says no. It's something you can use. It's not better as long as you get your 95% level or whatever it is. So there is no just because it is specifically made for sampling does not mean it's better for sampling in all situations. And obviously for understatements, it should not be used. So it's a really good sampling method. For overstatements, it's equally bad for understatements. It doesn't do anything. So anyway, so next week we'll finish up this and probably start in on the internal control chapter, the 2 chapters, and I'm going to combine them. Actually, that's what I was working on when the power went out. So I'm kind of mad that I got to recreate part of it because it's like, why didn't I just hit save? And I found out my auto save isn't working. It's not, and I figured out why it's not working. The auto save folder that it's supposed to be saving to doesn't exist. So that's why my auto save isn't working. But anyway, so I'm going to combine the chapters 6 and 7, and they're very similar. If you look through them, I mean they're very similar. The only difference is that instead of being for material misstatement, you're looking for significant weaknesses in internal control. Other than that, it's that the methods are fairly consistent. So we'll go over both of those. Well, we'll probably start picking up next class. Question there? Okay, and Jason, you'll be happy to know SOC 1, 2, and 3 is on there. So, well, that's to look forward to. Okay. Questions? All right, well, let's call it a night. Now, I think some of you have already turned it in, but if you haven't turned in the test, turn it in. And if you have any questions on that or the homework, feel free to contact me. If you want to meet sometime, that's fine too, to get caught up. And I have office hours on Friday at noon and 6 p.m. But we can meet at any time if you want to.
Is there any homework for next week, or just the test with the homework again?
Yeah, the test we're working on. I think you already turned it in though. But yeah, it's just that.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I will talk to you guys next week or sooner if you want to set up a time or come to the office hours. Okay, guys. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Good night.